when you see the amount of volunteers that come out, and it's not unique to this valley, but we have a really strong volunteer force in this valley that comes out for trail work days between the Crested Butte Mountain Bike Association up in Butte and then Gunnison Trails. And it's, you don't want to say they're all mountain bikers a lot of the time, it's various trail users. But, I know the mountain bikers and all of us like to point to, hey, we really do come out in droves to get back to our trails in one form or another.
You're listening to Relish This, the Purpose Marketing Podcast. Here's your host, Stu Swineford.
Hey everybody, Stu here with another great episode. My guest today is Tim Kugler, and he's the Executive Director of Gunnison Trails. They are a really fun organization that does trail work and advocacy in the Gunnison Valley, which is very dear to my heart because I grew up in Gunnison. So while listening to this episode, you're going to get to hear Tim and I nerd out on trail work and things of that nature. But we also talked a lot about how to keep an audience engaged. So during that Inspire phase, how to get people to move from a donor to a volunteer to an advocate. And then we also talked about optimizing email and some of the trends that we're seeing in the nonprofit space that tend to make your emails work a lot better. So I think you're going to enjoy this episode. I had a ton of fun. So here we go. Tim, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Stu. How you doing?
I'm well, thanks. It's great to have you on the show. I'm excited to hear what you are up to over in my hometown of Gunnison with the trail system over there.
Yeah, I'm excited to tell you all about it.
Yeah. So are you one of the founders of Gunnison Trails, or are you just the director right now?
I'm the current executive director. The organization was founded back in 2006 by Dave Weens, who it sounds like you know all about. And I took the reins from him back in 2017 when he went on and took a job as the executive director of the International Mountain Bike Association.
Yeah, he's been with IMBA for a few years now.
He has, yeah. It's pretty much since I took over for Gunny Trails, he moved over to IMBA. So it would have been in early spring of 2017.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit more about what you have going on there at Gunnison Trails.
Yeah. So we're a nonprofit trail advocacy organization. We were kind of founded with a pretty simple mission. We mainly caretake, maintain the trails out at Hartman Rocks Recreation Area, about 3 miles south of town, has about 45 miles of motorized, mechanized trails that are outstanding, top tier trails. So we sort of started to steward those trails in addition to sort of educate the greater trail using public on sort of proper trail etiquette and trail closures as it relates to wildlife and springtime mud closures. And then finally, kind of the third piece is sort of look for new opportunities to build additional, human powered trails here in the Valley and Gunnison County.
Oh, that's great. I know that you have an interesting challenge over there with the sage grouse, right? Is it?
Yep.
The sage or the blue? Sage grouse.
Sage grouse is a unique species that was identified, I think it was about 15 years ago as a unique species. And yeah, that very much dictates a lot of what we can and can't do in terms of new trail development, but then also, it has some pretty heavy-handed closures, not just the trails, but a lot of our county roads close as well during when those birds are mating, which is, the closures here for Gunny County are March 15th through May 15th. We have a lot of roads and trails close to give those birds some time.
Yeah, as you know, I grew up over there, and I remember visiting a couple of years ago, and I wasn't aware of the closures, and I started to do a run over on Signal Peak area, and pretty quickly came to a bunch of area that was not accessible at that time. So,
and that's we might touch on that a little later, but that's been really interesting because we've had some new trail development in the Signal Peak area, and there's been a long history of use up there, as I'm sure you know. Mainly on roads, and then there's some sort of old school trails that are also meander their way through there. But there was no real management strategy up there until we submitted a plan to build some new trails. We got it approved by the BLM, and then when new trail development started to go in, that's when they actually started to incorporate some wildlife restrictions and closures, both for wintering big game as well as the sage grouse. So it was sort of a blessing in that we got a lot of opportunity to build some really cool new trails close to town. But at the same time, it came with some pretty heavy-handed closures that meant, whereas historically you could have gone up there in the spring when it was dry. Now, there's a whole area where there's no human use at all. So no mountain biking, no trail running, no hiking for 2 months for sage grouse. So, it's been that all came about in 2017. So it's been a little bit of a learning curve too for folks that have, historically used that area, and now they can't for a couple months in the springtime.
Yeah, it's always a challenge. People want to have access to the stuff that they want to have access to.
Right.
But at the same time, I think that's kind of part of living with, with the wildlife that we so enjoy seeing and all that too. So we have to both be respectful, I guess. And
it's, the nice thing is, it's definitely a challenge, but at the same time, it's not unique to the Gunnison area. So, if you recreate in, Durango, you name it, so many places around the state have, closures, whether it's for wintering big game or for other sort of unique species. And so I think, trail users are getting used to, seeing such closures and sort of having springtime as a time in their, at least in the back of their mind, where it's right. You might come across a closure and not be aware of it, but it's not, they probably will have seen a similar closure somewhere else, and it won't be just completely new and new to them.
Right. I know there's some climbing areas over here in the Boulder area that get closed for raptor.
They do.
Raptor hatching.
Yeah.
At certain times during the year. So it's something that I think we all kind of have to contend with as we encroach upon and live within these areas that wildlife are present.
Yeah, very much so. And like you said, it's I think a lot of times the trail using public or trail users as recreationists get pointed to just wanting to go out and get their, adrenaline fix if you're a mountain biker, or, maybe a bit of a selfish reason for going out and getting your 1 hour run in or something. But, as you said, everyone I know that uses trails loves when they come across wildlife and loves that, we're sharing the landscape with them. So it goes, hand in hand with us being good stewards. And, if we want new trail development, we need to be willing to, acknowledge that, we got to share the landscape.
Yeah, absolutely. Is that part of your mission at Gunny Trails? Is that educational piece for the public?
Yeah, very much so. I'm actually right before we started chatting, I'm putting together we send out a newsletter every now and again to, we have about 3,000 people or so that are signed up. And this one is going to speak to the sage grouse closures we have coming up March 15th. And just try and bring some, we still have snow on the ground. So, folks aren't exactly in the trail mode, but, probably as well as anyone when, winters are long here in Colorado, and when spring starts to open things up, people kind of have the trail fix and want to get out. And so it's important to kind of get these messages in front of people well ahead of time. So yeah, a big portion of what I do is getting the education out there, as well as just trying to get it into various, do things differently each year, so people aren't kind of seeing the same message every springtime on March 10th from me.
Sure.
So it's a little bit more of an impact, or it might catch people who wouldn't otherwise maybe read our newsletter.
Yeah, that's great. One of the things that we've been seeing in the nonprofit space and in the for-profit space as well, is a slight shift away from newsletters and moving toward an email standard that feels a lot more one-to-one. So instead of having a highly designed newsletter with a whole bunch of different messages and things that people can do, really honing that down into a text-only email that comes from a person. So comes from you. So you're the who it's from. The reply to address is an actual person. The messaging. So talking about that whole envelope thing, the messaging is very keyed toward timeliness and a person. So it's, if you can customize even the subject line to use somebody's name, or at least use the word you in that. that tends to be really effective. And then in the body of the message, stripping out all the design there as well, and really having it feel like it came from your mom, that tends to really kind of hammer home that this is a person talking to the person who's receiving the email.
Right.
And we've seen a much higher, rate of attraction on those. Interesting.
Yeah. And it's crazy because it's a science, and so much of communication is, I wouldn't say I'm blessed in being a terrific communicator, especially now with, all the different social media platforms. And,
right.
And so it's an ever changing, ever evolving world that I'm sort of constantly learning or needing to relearn, which I will say is I'm trying to enjoy that element of my job instead of just wanting to pull my hair out. But it's great. It's also really rewarding when you have folks who give you feedback and say, hey, I really appreciated it when you reached out and, said this, that, or the other. And so, yeah, it's definitely something we're always trying to stay on top of in terms of reaching, the Signal Peak Trail system is a great example of, a lot of the users are students at Western State at the college there. And, talk about a class of individuals that are not going to want to get another email. So
yeah, exactly.
If I send out that generic email to Western kids, there's a good chance they didn't even open it up. So, another just unique challenge is how do you reach those students to get some of these important messages out that a lot of times is just telling a good story. If you have a good for why we're closing the trails, they're going to be really receptive to if I can spell it out in such a way that kind of captures their attention.
Well, for sure. And that sounds like an additional challenge that you have is that your audience types are kind of all over the place. So, trying to figure out where to put those messages out there is a real challenge in terms of the fact that you have, you have all these different avatars that you need to be able to, to talk to.
Right. Yeah. And do so from a less of a sort of heavy-handed, here are the rules, you need to follow them approach, to more of just like hey, there's a really cool bird up here that you've probably never seen, and this is why we're closing the trail.
Right. So, do you give them opportunities for other options, like make suggestions to go to Hartman or to wherever that doesn't have those closures?
We certainly do. Yeah. And we're very fortunate in that, right around the time, I think the trails in Signal Peak would dry out in a normal year, a couple weeks earlier than the trails at Hartman Rocks, maybe.
Yep.
Always different, but we're fortunate in that we do have an outlet and a system of really good trails that pretty much are open when folks might want to otherwise go to other areas. So we are lucky there, and we've certainly put out the word before when we have a lot of snow here that, hey, Salida riding and the trail's over in Montrose and Grand Junction. So, but again, that's also, that's not news to anyone right now anymore. It's most everyone knows a lot of the conditions in some of these other places. So,
yeah, for sure. Well, I like that you guys have built some new trail right there close to the campus. So in theory, at least my recollection is that the sage grouse closure was back there a little bit, a quarter mile or half a mile back on the main, kind of that main 2-track that goes up above the water towers.
Exactly. Yep.
And then, but there's a lot of opportunity kind of below that down toward the campus or toward the,
like east of town.
Yeah, exactly. The cemetery there.
Yeah, exactly. And that all sits on, that's sort of a combination of private and Western Colorado University land. And and you're correct. That's a lot of those sort of lower, there's about we mapped it out last year. There's about
a couple miles,
7.5 to 8 miles.
Cool.
Single track trail that you can, that you can access when the area is otherwise closed. And, that's for your typical hiker, trail runner, dog walker, even cyclist. Like that's plenty to kind of go fix. But I know plenty of people that they recreate 5 times a week. And if they know bike, that's a short loop, and all of a sudden they're ready to move on to the next thing. So, but that again is critical for us to be able to sort of maintain those closures, to allow people to have access to some of the trails that are close by. And the fact that they're so close in proximity to sort of downtown Gunnison is pretty awesome as well.
Yeah, I think just education is so key, and giving people options as well. So, just letting them know, hey, ride it clockwise, and then turn around and ride it counterclockwise, and you get 16
Right.
miles in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I can think of a lot of areas where folks aren't as fortunate with close to town options.
Yeah, for sure.
Options where you don't have to drive, 30 minutes or 45 minutes. So, yeah. And again, another selling point of, hey, these closures in a year like this, for example, winter like this, those trails are going to probably be dry right around the time the closure sets in, in another couple weeks. They're
Mm-hmm.
gonna be dry and
Mm-hmm.
just kind of like begging, taunting you from town. But again, it's
Yeah.
like, well, we have these other amazing stretches of trail that are close by. So, and people get it, for the most part, the compliance up there is actually pretty good.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah.
It's good to hear. So it sounds like you have a pretty good mailing list. How frequently are you trying to reach out to that crew?
Not enough, but at the same time, my job is very seasonal in the sense of when we're trying to communicate a lot of different things. So, we're right now is when we're just starting to kind of ramp up in terms of outreach to trail users, as well as just as our season sort of unfolds and starts to get busier and busier. But gosh, we probably send out on average, maybe, come summertime, we're doing weekly trail work days. So we're sending out at least an email or one email a week.
Okay.
But, come wintertime, people don't need to hear from me every week. It would be,
sure.
I try not to kill folks on that front. And a lot of it is, we groom a wintertime trail system that's been pretty new for us in the last few years. It's been a super hilarious learning curve to figure out how to groom single track trails. But again, that's sort of, it's much more, things are updated much more quickly than sort of an email would be the ideal choice to use. So instead it's, Facebook, Instagram, those sort of platforms to get grooming reports in front of folks. So we transition back and forth as to what, the best outreach is for some of these different initiatives.
Cool. Did you guys, so that's out at Hartman, correct?
It is. Yeah.
Did you guys get a snow puppy or whatever those things are called? Yeah, we bought one of those this year too, but we haven't had enough snow over here to use it yet.
So the snow dog is like
snow dog, yeah,
the Russian equivalent of what we have. And I actually, that's hilarious that you brought that up. I might need to test that out at some point. I don't know if your snow dog wants to travel or come up to Gunnison to have a little vacation day, but I've been intrigued to see how that machine would work versus we have what's called a trail tamer. And it's
okay.
It's built by this pretty cool company out of Lake Lillian. What is it? Minnesota or Michigan? Damn,
okay.
I don't remember. But they sell like snowmobile tracks, so the rubber tracks that all snowmobiles use, and they have a pretty big sort of fat bike single track scene in that part of the country, and they made this purpose built groomer, so very similar to the snow dog, but the thing weighs like twice as much as the snow dog.
Okay.
Super cumbersome, pretty top heavy, but holy cow, can it put down some good trail when you've kind of figured out how to use it. But yeah, we groom about 14 miles of trail out at Hartman's, and with, I think we've been permitted to groom a little over 25 miles, but there's certain trails that it doesn't really work on. And then there's other trails we still haven't really tried to groom just yet because we're waiting for the right winter or you name it, just more time to kind of figure out what does work and what doesn't, and then we'll kind of expand from there.
Well, I'll let you know how it goes. We're supposed to get this dump coming in tomorrow. This episode probably won't air until June, so people will be like, "Why are you talking about this?"
Right.
But we're supposed to finally get a substantial enough amount of snow that we might actually be able to drag the thing out tomorrow. So or Thursday rather, I guess. So we'll see.
I feel for your lower back. If it's anything like ours, there's some technique. I can give you tons of tips and tricks for.
Okay, well, I'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah, it's a funny learning curve, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So it sounds like you have a good social media presence in terms of kind of those updates that happen more frequently. You're hitting your email list, particularly during the season, fairly regularly. And then you have your website as well.
Yep.
What's your donor situation like? Are people pretty active and whatnot, or is that always a struggle for you?
No, it's one of those, if I had more time, the more time I put into that, the better off and the more that would grow. But no, we have a pretty diversified sort of donor source. We have, memberships that folks can buy, and that's a super popular program. And that's taken a while to kind of set up to be more automated and less of a, kind of people writing in checks, which people still do, and more, automated credit card style.
Right.
But that's been a really, that's been pretty consistent to grow, slowly growing over the years. We've got business sponsorships, so you can, various partner levels for businesses to kind of sign up and get various perks from, basically marketing on our end for them. And then we actually have a pretty cool program that started back in 2016 called Pennies for Trails. And it's basically a 1% type program. So you as a customer go into a business, and that business tacks on an extra sort of penny for every dollar you spend there, and it comes directly back to our organization.
That's great. We were looking at trying to do that for NATO a few years ago, and we never managed to get our act together enough to do it. But that's just a great way to diversify those revenue streams and really create opportunity for a variety of different streams of revenue. Do you guys sell kits or anything as well? Do you have a retail component?
We do have merchandise, and that's been in a couple. We kind of moved back and forth into various local stores here in the Valley, which has been pretty cool. But it's mainly on our website. But again, It's something, if I had more time and could sort of get more of that merchandise into stores rather than sitting in my garage, that's. But again, certain areas of focus. As much as I'd love to put time into that, it's sort of like you kind of look at the cost benefit and how much time would I put into it before, we really start seeing a return. We treat our merchandise as almost sort of breaking even. So, hey, the more we get out there, the more advertising we have for our organization. But at the same time, we're not going to be bringing in an extra, 6 figures by selling hoodies. At least right now we won't.
Sure. Yeah.
But no, that's been, the merchandise is definitely another sort of piece. We do better with, we put on a race every Memorial Day weekend called the Original Growler. And that's definitely a good spot to get some of our product in front of 700 plus racers that come.
Yeah, that's a great race. In fact, the last 2 years ago, I think I was out just riding on my cross bike, and I forgot that the race was going on, and I ended up on course, and people were like cheering me on. I'm like, no, I didn't race this whole thing on my gravel bike.
I've had a couple of people reach out this year saying, hey, I sold my cross country bike and all I've got is a gravel bike. What do you think? And it's always sort of like, well, it could be done.
Sure. Yeah.
A cup of tea, but, that's funny.
Yeah. It was really amusing.
That was
at the time. So
a couple of years ago, 2019 we had to skip it last year. So 2019 was the last year we held it.
Yeah. Yep. That was the year for sure.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool. I mean, you have a variety of different revenue streams, which I love. And the fact that you can probably throttle some of that stuff a little bit as well in terms of being able to flip switches. So, for example, if you decided that you wanted to put on another race, you have that infrastructure and that historical knowledge of how to do that. So being able to spin up another version of it. So if you think of scalability, it's great to be able to kind of have those switches to pull. Because a lot of nonprofits have, really a hard time because they just have one revenue stream. And then if that dries up, they're in trouble.
Right. And, the longer I'm at this job, the more I realize how fortunate, Dave Ween started the Growler in 2008 was year number 1. And it was back when, it was just a growing scene, a sort of race. The cross country race scene was, evolving, but certainly, everyone could have put on a race and watched it flourish. And now we're sort of at a crossroads where there's new formats coming up like enduro and,
Mm-hmm.
gravel races. A lot of the folks that might otherwise, a lot of the racers that come and do the Growler would probably be good candidates to do gravel races as well. And
Mm-hmm.
I sort of inherited when I took in on this role a very successful race, and I don't want to say I got complacent, but there's a number of years there where if I'm not really putting energy into that race, it could sort of wither, and it's an immense, it kind of pays my, it started to basically bring in a source of revenue to have a paid director. So
Right.
it's crucial to our organization. And the more I, again, sort of live and breathe this job, the more I recognize how fortunate I am to have a successful race that already has a massive following. And I'm not trying to, basically say, gosh, we need another source of revenue. Maybe we can put on an event, because they're just so hard to get established. So much competition in that world.
It really is. And then obviously during pandemic times, it's darn near impossible to do that. How did you guys replace that revenue last year, or did you?
We kind of, we didn't, we gave, let's see, by the time we had to cancel the race, we had about 400 folks signed up, and, and we kind of gave them the option of, hey, you can get a full refund, but if you like what we do, you want to support our organization, this is an important source of revenue for us. Feel free to donate a portion of your entry, or you can even donate all of it. And we had a pretty good feedback on that, to the tune of close to $20,000.
Oh, great.
We recouped some of the race proceeds there. And then now we have, enough on the books that we could kind of weather last year, and it's not going to sink the ship. So, it was tough to not put on the race, but at the same time, again, as you pointed out, we have diverse revenue stream, and we haven't, we're not just kind of living paycheck to paycheck. So you take a year like last year, and sort of, it wasn't ideal, but we can, roll with it and kind of come this season, sort of hit the ground running again.
Yeah. Well, the nice thing about not being able to have events is you don't have the cost of those events either. So that's kind of a bonus, I guess, if you want to try and look at it in a positive light. What did you do with with those new email addresses, the people that did donate? Have you been trying to nurture those people, even though they're not necessarily Gunnison Valley, standards?
They kind of all get thrown into our greater Growler email list, and that's a really good point. I have I think they got the occasional email about what we've been up to. So last summer we actually had, despite the pandemic, we had our biggest, we run sort of a in-house trail crew. So when we first started in 2006, we were all volunteer. We do weekly volunteer work nights, and we did those to a lesser extent in 2020 because of the pandemic, but that's still sort of a very important portion of our organization, is getting people out on the ground and doing the work. It's sort of cliche, but it really does offer that buy-in that a lot of folks want. But we had an 8-person trail crew last summer. And so, we basically outreach, basically let these folks know, hey, just so your Growler proceeds kind of allowed us to hold, a bigger trail crew than we ever had before. And we got, I think 3,500 hours worth of work done.
Great.
So, just acknowledging, those people that did give that, hey, just so this race is much more than a race to us, but it allows us to do, these pretty phenomenal feats all summer long. So, but no, in terms of donor sort of support and feedback, again, if I had more time, that would be something that would be really time well spent. Acknowledging those people that really give big.
Well, one of the things that, I love that you had that messaging in there, this is what your donation contributed toward. It, kept somebody on a crew. It helped build, X number of miles of trail, or we put in this many work hours, et cetera. Giving people something very tangible.
Yeah.
As a result of their contribution is incredibly incredibly powerful. So I love that you're already thinking in that way. I guess what I would encourage you to do is just continue that and really think about how you can segment that audience and speak to those people perhaps just a little bit differently than maybe you do to the Growler audience at large.
Yeah.
There's also there's an opportunity, and I don't know if you do this for the event itself. I know that the event obviously the event fuels a lot of the stuff that you're doing, but just giving people the ability to donate as part of their as an add-on to their race fee. Just giving them that option can generate a lot of revenue as well.
Yeah. And that's something that is an option. And it's funny. I remember when I first started in this role, I think in 2017, Dave Wiens was sort of holding my hand as he kind of introduced. I took over right at the beginning of May, so the Growler was about 3 weeks later that year. So
right.
I was definitely trial by fire, but Dave was sort of still putting on the Growler, but kind of gave me the caveat of, hey, this is my last year doing it, so pay close attention because this is your baby next year. But I remember noticing that year, man, we're already asking them to pay X amount of dollars to race, and now we're asking them for an additional donation, and then people donate, and they're and then they show up and they thank you and say, hey, great work, we're so excited to have the opportunity to give a little bit more. And so it is amazing how when you don't be afraid to ask, when you put that out there. And,
yeah, there's a saying that someone, I don't know who said it originally, but it gets thrown around a lot, and it's that the answer is always no if you don't ask.
Yep.
And so I think just giving people an easy way to kick in a little bit more. There are ways that in theory you could incentivize their performance, even have them do some sort of sponsorship where if they finish under a certain time, they're trying to get people who will pay to match match that kind of performance, and that then helps with their performance as well. And so there are a lot of ways to get really creative, particularly when you're talking about race entry fees. I know that so I used to race marathons, and New York City Marathon they had a few different ways that you could get in. And the first way was you could qualify. The second way you could just throw into a hat and you get, as part of the raffle. Yeah. And then the third way was to raise money. And they had either a specific charity or a group of charities that you could choose from. Yeah. And if you got some dollar figure, $1,500 or something like that towards this charity, then you got, I don't think you even got a free entry. I think you just got access to the race. And so just doing things like that and being really, really creative with that user base. I know mountain bikers are, they're one of the, we see mountain bikers being really generous in their desire to give back to the trail systems that they love. Yeah. Maybe more so than some of the other groups that use them. And so just leaning on that, I think would be something I would encourage.
Yeah. And that's something that we often sort of, I don't want to say brag, but that's, when you see the amount of volunteers that come out, and it's not unique to this valley, but we have a really strong volunteer force in this valley that comes out for trail work days between the Crested Butte Mountain Bike Association up in and then Gunnison Trails. And it's, you don't want to say they're all mountain bikers. A lot of the time, it's various trail users.
Yeah.
But, I know the mountain bikers and all of us like to point to, hey, we really do come out in droves to get back to our trails in one form or another.
Yeah, it feels like it. And so giving people the option to either pay to play, if they, because, some people have more money than time, and some people have more time than money, and some people have a little bit of both. And so just trying to, and this is what we call kind of the inspire phase of this kind of audience engagement cycle, but trying to just get people to move between different levels of engagement. So, taking a volunteer and getting them to donate, and taking a donor and getting them to volunteer, just kind of trying to get some transactional movement around that ecosystem can be super effective.
Right. I agree.
Do you, Are there any other events that you put on during the course of the year in a normal year?
Yeah, we do. We kind of have sort of three main events. One is the Growler, and that's sort of a colossal event. It takes a ton of energy and is the biggest source of revenue from all of them. And then we put on sort of a fall end of season event called Ales for Trails, which it used to be the Big Beers for Big Gears event, and we kind of it's always been around. I think that was right around when they had Beer and Chili Fest up in Crested Butte, and we had a bunch of brewers in town. And so it was it's always just been an excuse to basically get folks together and drink some beer and kind of celebrate the trail season. So now we do it at our founding Pennies for Trail partner, High Alpine Brewing, kind of hosts this every fall sometime. And it's just a way to, it's less of a fundraiser, so it's an event, and obviously we're trying to raise revenue for our organization, but it's more of a show some love to one of our big sponsors, High Alpine Brewing. So we pack their house, and then it's also just kind of a way to raise a glass to everyone and sort of celebrate a trail season as we come into wintertime. And that's been, I hate to say it's my favorite event, but it is my favorite event. It's certainly very little in terms of work that goes into it, but again,
right.
Sort of a way to, it's almost a way to thank those that have given us so much. And I think it comes back, it pays itself in dividends, not necessarily at that that night in what we kind of bring in terms of money, but just keeping folks happy and acknowledging them that it was took a lot of work to do another trail season, and so that one's been really fun. And then we do one in the middle of winter, like the doldrums of winter in February. We host what we call the Winter Blast, and that's sort of a auction. A bunch of local businesses donate some pretty cool swag, and we auction it off. And we just have a big dinner held at Western at their ballroom. Usually, I think we sell about 160 tickets for that. And again, a nice little source of revenue in the winter, but just another way to sort of give trail users sort of an update on what's coming up that season, and just sort of a nice something to look forward to in February in Gunnison, which is kind of like the coldest, darkest place in the continental U.S.
It certainly can be.
Yeah.
Those
are sort of our three biggies, and it's funny when the Growler finishes, and I've sort of like, you have that sort of post-event buzz, and you're like, wow, that was so happy to have gotten through that. And that's when my mind will be like, man, should we do a fall Growler? And then reality quickly sets in, and I'm like, no, we're not doing another event. That's so, I've toyed with maybe doing some other type of race, maybe some other, we've toyed around doing maybe a winter race of sorts. Probably not to the tune of what the Growler is by any means, but no, events are, it's crazy. Events are incredible sources of income, but they, like you pointed out, they are just excessive in the amount of time and energy and oftentimes expense that go into them. So, you want to know what you're getting into before you start going down that path.
Yeah. I wonder if you could do like something around, are mountain bike or fat bike worlds still held in Crested Butte, or do they move that around now?
They moved that around now. This year was the first year where we were, Gunnison County wasn't that it couldn't have happened, but it could not have happened in the sort of the traditional fat bike world scene. So it actually moved up to Wyoming.
Okay.
And I'm trying to think where it was in Wyoming. I think Laramie maybe hosted it.
Okay.
But I think the idea there is to get it to, much like the other world events, cycling world events, to kind of move around
Migrates.
various places. Right. And hopefully it'll come back home. But I think it'd be good to, have a change of scene. And, someone in Oregon may not want to drive to Crested Butte to attend it. So it would be great if it, moved around to various places.
Yeah, I was just thinking you could put a crit on or something in conjunction with that.
Yeah,
in terms of
someone reached out, and I'm not sure if they maybe had even reached out to you guys up in Nederland because you're grooming trail now, but they thought about like a kind of reviving the Colorado Winter Series and having it a winter series throughout the state on various trails, which again would be, that's almost like the sweet spot for an event where a lot of the planning and marketing and things might not necessarily fall on me or our organization, but we can still put on a pretty cool event and have a kick-ass weekend. Yeah,
I think this year it would have been faster on your on your cross bike around here, probably at that point in time. We were riding mountain bikes, fully in the woods until mid-January. I think this year it was.
No way.
It's been crazy.
That's crazy.
Yeah. We had a real dry winter so far. So
yeah, I think we're getting back to close to average, not in Gunnison, but up in the high country around here.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was pretty bleak up until January when the snow started falling.
Yeah. It was a late year and then a bit thin. So hopefully it'll kick back in here soon.
Yeah, we need it.
So tell me a little bit about this, and this may be just from a personal interest, but tell us a little bit about your weekly trail building that you do during the course of the season.
Yeah. So, we, up until 2016, we did, and we still do these, but it was basically all volunteer maintenance. So we had built a couple of new trails out at Hartman Rocks, but and they were always, again, sort of volunteer, folks coming out for the better part of a Saturday to knock out a new half-mile section of trail.
Mm-hmm.
But we do a thing called Trail Work Tuesday every Tuesday night from 3 to 7 or 4 to 7. And we, it's just kind of standard maintenance. So making sure, out at Hartman's, for example, when we get these heavy rains, we get a lot of erosion out there. So clearing drains and making sure, the soil isn't moving too far and replenishing it in areas where it needs it. With all the use that we've been seeing, making sure we're trying to keep the trails as narrow as we can and sort of closing down go-arounds as they form, because Hartman's, it's a technical area and there's a lot of opportunity for people to maybe get to a spot where they're in over their head and then they decide to ride around something. So, that up until 2016, that was sort of all volunteer. And then starting in 2016, we started with a youth core of 3 people for 10 weeks.
Okay.
And that sort of, over 5 years has sort of grown into this now 8-person crew that works, June through October. A lot of that growth was because we were approved to build trails up in Signal Peak. So to date, we've built about 6 new miles of trail, and we've been building on average about 3 miles a year. And we've got another 3 planned for this year. And then after that, we probably have another, 4 miles of trail before it's sort of, built out according to the plan. So there'll be, over 20 miles of trail when all is said and done up in Signal Peak. And that, to give you an idea, that's, Hartman Rocks has about 45 miles of trail. So it'll be about half the size of Hartman's.
That's amazing.
And that's been, again, also just kind of a big learning curve in terms of, I had some experience lining out trail and doing some trail building, but, I had more experience working in trees and places with rocks and Signal Peak is just sort of like an endless rolling sage.
It's just the sage out there.
Yeah, it's nothing but sage. And it's, it's been good. It's been super frustrating at first. I wish I had 10 more years under my belt before you start lining trail that's going to be on the ground, hopefully for, eternity. And they don't last that long. But, it's one of those, I beat myself up all the time because you want to knock it out of the park every time. And so there's certainly been a bit of a learning curve up there, but no, I mean, it's amazing to have the system of trail we have now from that you can access literally like less than a half mile from Main Street in Gunnison is pretty remarkable. And it's at first I was lamenting that it's not Hartman Rocks. There's not those sort of amazing rocky granite spires and the topography up there is very different, but at the same time, it's kind of great. We have 2 very different trail networks that appeal to different people. And so, it's been sort of it took me a while to sort of realize that just because it's different up there isn't necessarily a bad thing. But yeah, so we do, last year was a little different with COVID, but the trail crew sort of organizes our weekly trail work days. It's a bit of a juggling act now that we have an in-house crew to kind of tackle a lot of those smaller maintenance projects. It's now I find myself like, oh, how do we, keep projects coming for volunteers? So it's a very good project or a good problem to have in that we're almost like, not, and I don't want to say that we don't have any maintenance that needs doing. And in fact, we're going to have a trail crew this year specific to just working at Hartman Rocks because that place has been so much abuse the last few years. So there's plenty to do, but it's juggling both a paid trail crew as well as a volunteer force is definitely took some doing. But yeah, so the crew splits its time between, last year, for example, they probably spent half their summer building trail up in the Signal Peak area, and then the other half either maintaining trails out at Hartman's or working up. It's been pretty rewarding. We've been able to move a lot of what we do up into the high country. So we're starting to assist a couple different Forest Service ranger districts with sort of backlog trail maintenance that they have.
Oh, that's neat.
Yeah. And that's, again, for our organization that's historically worked at Hartman's and sort of in the sage country, it's been kind of cool to expand sort of our skill set and where we
it's
work.
Different.
And, when you start looking at the map around Gunnison, you have, 3 massive wilderness areas that have a ton of trails in it that need love. And it is funny because I think a lot of times trail organizations get pegged as mountain bike organizations, but James was pretty strategic when he set up Gunnison, when he started Gunnison Trails, that it would be Gunnison Trails. And so, a lot of our work now, we find we've got a couple big projects lined up this summer to work on long stretches of trail in either the West Elk Wilderness or the Fossil Ridge Wilderness. So,
okay.
For me as an avid cyclist and a, lover of two wheels, it's also pretty rewarding to get to go into some of these places where, you're leaving a pretty big impact and you're doing it for not necessarily a place where you're going to come back and get to ride the trail.
Right. Yeah. It's always fun. I mean, that's one of the things that we've done at Nederland Area Trail Organization as well, is really, we try to be very agnostic in terms of usage, and we're trying to build trails that are fun and safe and challenging and unique to the area for all different user types. So everybody from equestrians to runners to hikers to people who are on bikes. And so,
and it's not easy.
Yeah. And, we don't have, so where our trails are mostly non-mechanized in terms of motor vehicles.
Yeah. They're non-mechanized too.
No, they're non-motorized. Sorry, I misspoke there. So most of them are mechanized, but non-motorized where we're working. Although, there are some wilderness areas close by that certainly we could get up into that are for, hikers only. Yeah. But we really do try to build trails for everybody. And I think that that's a really important thing to get out there, is that you're not just doing this for the mountain bike community. Right.
And, it's so easy to point a finger at, I think that's a lot of times in, the core hardcore mountain biker might point to some of those sort of multi-use trails as being, a sanitized version of what they really want to see. And they're certainly not wrong. I would say, again, I'm really fortunate in that I live in an area that has a really good diversity of trails. And so when we do build a new, 6% grade trail in Signal Peak, that is fun. We're trying to make it fun for everyone and keep all users in mind. We acknowledge that, hey, if you're really looking to get gnarly, there's plenty of opportunity to do that. That's not only close by, but you can pedal to a lot of it. So, I do feel for some of those areas that may not have some of the diversity that we have, and how do you sort of satisfy a lot of different, a lot of differences that people are looking for, how to create. So I think that's something we'll see more and more of. And you see, more bike optimized trails in areas where we're really trying to separate some of the uses. And again, we happen to be in a spot that sort of has enough trails for everyone to kind of get their fix.
There's certainly a ton of opportunity in the Gunnison Valley.
Yeah. And, I think it's good to, acknowledge that, and by no means do I try not to take that for granted ever, but I also acknowledge that there are areas where there might not be those sort of gnarly steep trails that some 12-year-old on a mountain bike like I was once is really looking to get after it on. So it's tough, but it's nice to see agencies acknowledging that exists, and a lot of that is to credit the mountain bike advocacy groups that are really pushing for more of that sort of engagement and recognition.
And that's what we do is, there may be trails that aren't particularly great for, for running or horses that that are, built more for mountain bikes, but in the same area, there'll be some other opportunities that allow for, kind of that access that everybody would like.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, it's always kind of a challenge, but yeah, it's kind of, that's sort of one aspect of the job that makes it really, really rewarding and fun, is that it is challenging.
Right.
Yeah.
So what are your plans for this year? Obviously you have your in-house crew that's going to be active. It sounds like you're going to be able to continue doing some volunteer stuff. The race sounds like it's on for, at least right now, for this Memorial Day.
Yeah, knock on wood.
Yeah. What else is on deck for you guys in 2021?
We've got, so you kind of touched on it. We've got about 3 miles of trail that's going to make for some really cool connectivity up in Signal Peak. So it'll sort of make the biggest sort of outer loop of the system. So it'll provide, a really long distance if someone wants to, if they were to connect all the single track using the new stuff we're going to build this summer, you'd be looking at like a 20-mile ride where you wouldn't have to ride on the same trail.
Nice.
So that's kind of a biggie that we're that's like a main focus point this summer. And then another really cool opportunity that's kind of come down the pipeline, and it's by no means set in stone, but with the passing of the Great American Outdoors Act, there's some pretty cool funding coming down from the federal government that organizations like Gunnison Trails or youth corps can access to help them with sort of a backlog of deferred maintenance. And so again, we're hoping to kind of expand a lot of what we do into not necessarily a Forest Service, but a lot of it is on Forest Service trails in and around Gunnison. So, hopefully we'll get the crew crosscut certified this summer, and they can kind of go in and safely clear some wilderness trails where we can't use chainsaws. And
right.
So, for me, this is sort of selfishly just kind of, it's really cool to be able to sort of expand the areas where we work. But at the same time, I recognize we have an opportunity with Signal Peak to build a new trail, but at the end of the day, those opportunities are not, they don't come down the pipe every year. And a lot of what we're going to need to focus on is maintenance. And we have some just amazing stretches of trail here that have never seen a tool for the last 20 years. And so, and and that's sort of my bag. I love exploring some of these areas that, to your average rider, it might be just a miserable experience, but these are historic trails that have been around forever, and they were well before sustainable alignments were used. And we don't want them to go away. We might have the opportunity to reroute them one day or make those unsustainable bits more sustainable. But even just the task of clearing them and keeping them open is monumental. And so that's kind of a big portion of hopefully what we'll sort of be teeing up to work on in the next several years is knocking out some of these trail segments that just need like proper tree removal and brush clearing to even just open up the corridor again.
Right.
And, I nerd out and I look at some of the maps from, for La Garita Wilderness and West Elk Wilderness and Fossil Ridge Wilderness, all these wilderness areas that we're so fortunate to have close by. And they're covered in trails. And what's crazy is I haven't had a chance to explore half of them,
right.
or hell, even like 2/3 of them. So,
yeah.
So to be able to, have a reason to get into this country and call it quote unquote work, but also be, assisting with a pretty important service that I think a lot of folks will appreciate is pretty special. So that sort of got me pretty excited between, having new trails to build this summer and then also have some pretty cool maintenance projects on the docket it's exciting times for sure.
It sounds really great. How can people find out more about Gunnison Trails?
You can always head to our website. We try and keep that pretty up to date with sort of a news feed on the front page. And then if you head to the website, you'll have a little window that pops up and you can join our newsletter, or you can follow us on Facebook or Instagram.
That's great. And is it just GunnisonTrails.org?
Yep. Bingo.
GunnisonTrails.org. Awesome. So I love everything that you guys are doing. It sounds like you're just crushing it. And I'm really excited to see what's next for you. And certainly next time I come over with a bike and it's trail riding time, I will give you a shout.
I hope so.
I love to talk about how, what we can all do to get a little stronger in marketing and how we can make our nonprofits thrive. But I really like for the people who are listening to the show to have something to take an action on at the end of our conversation. If there was one thing that you wanted people to do after listening to the show today, what do you think that would be?
Oh boy. Gosh, I would say take one day to volunteer with, it doesn't have to be a local trail organization, but some sort of stewardship project. And hopefully this sort of, your listeners are hopefully folks that, if they're still listening, they hopefully use public lands and trails and like to get after it. But, we're fortunate to live in an area that has, Colorado specifically has so many opportunities to get out there, but volunteer stewardship is the reason I'm in the job I'm in today. It's actually how I met my wife. It's just incredible to actually get out there and see some of the work that needs to be done on the ground. So if that's one piece of advice, it's set aside one day to kind of go out. And if you've never, done any trail maintenance or done any sort of stewardship project, take a day to do it, because it really is more rewarding than you might think.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I would encourage anyone who has plans to go over to the Gunnison area to look up GunnisonTrails.org and see if there's a volunteer opportunity while you're there to kind of give back to those trails that we all really love and use and abuse a little bit. So
yeah, we'll take you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks so much for being on the show today.
Yeah,
I had a really great time talking with you, Tim, and look forward to seeing you soon.
Sounds great, Stu. Thanks for having me.
Sure. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.
All right, there you have it. Another great episode of Relish This. Thanks for listening. If you would like to learn more about how to apply the audience engagement cycle to expand your organization's mission, there are two things you can do. Right now, you can go to missionuncomfortablebook.com to download a copy of my book. And while you're there, you can get your purpose-driven marketing score to see where you can unearth some gold for your organization. If you'd like to listen to back episodes of the show or sign up to be a guest, go to relishstudio.com/podcast. That's it for this week. I'll be back next week for another great episode of Relish This.